So if you want to make sure that was recording. All right. So in the meantime, let's do a little bit of an icebreaker. In the chat, please type in two things, your favorite type of potato and what year your student will be graduating. Are they class of 2026, 2027, 2028? Favorite type of potato and graduating class. Nobody? Everyone's shy? Ah, thank you. Gotta be sweet. Sweet potato fries is the first one. That is my absolute. Nobody ever says that. So thank you, Tracy. In 2028. Fries in 2028. Tater tots. That's a good one. Purple potato. I don't think I know what that is. I'd have to look into that, Eric. I don't think I know what russet is either, Chester. I learn new things every day. For anyone that's just joining us, we'll put it in the chat our favorite types of potatoes and what graduating class our students are in. 2027, that's next year. Applications are due in November. I hope you're ready. Not to make you nervous, but all good and all fun things. Mashed full of pickle juice and pepper. Yukon Gold 2027. Oh, these are fancy. Most of the time when I do these questions, most people just say potato chips or potato like regular potatoes, but we've got some fancy ones in here. I like it. I like it. We will get started in about a minute or two. Just wait to see if anybody else trickles in. For those who just joined us and don't know what's going on in the webinar chat, we'll just put it in our favorite types of potatoes and graduating class. 2030 waffle fries. With 2030, this is a perfect time. It's never too early to start thinking about the college game because college is a business, and you'll hear me say that a lot during this presentation. All right, we'll give it a minute or two and then we'll get started. And just so you know, this presentation is about an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half long, but you can stay for questions at the end. And then we have a surprise at the end, so make sure you don't leave, even if you have to listen in the background. Just stay till the end. Okay. Anybody else? Where are we all from? Where's everybody calling from? And can anybody guess where I'm calling from? Okay, Washington. I'm not in Washington. That's the only hint I'll give you. Washington. So we probably, most people are from Washington tonight, I'm assuming. Washington, Washington. Yes, you'll definitely be able to access the recording later. Delaware. Oh, you're guessing. No, I'm not from Delaware. Washington. Fun fact, I used to be from New Jersey, but from New Jersey, I moved to my current location. It's not too far from Jersey. Seattle, we're the world champion Super Bowl. I love it. I love the energy. Washington. So we have a lot of people from Washington. Another hint, it's currently 8:30 where I'm located. New York. Close, but no. Well, actually, not close. Is this where parents? Yeah, this is a great webinar for parents, but also students can definitely listen. Philadelphia, Michigan. Michigan is the closest answer. What is close to Michigan? I'm neighbors to Michigan. Maine. But yeah, Marie, parents, I would say this presentation is mostly for parents, but yeah, I always love when students join just so they can also understand what is at stake. Not Indiana. Only because we have to start the presentation, I might have to give you the next hint that's going to make it super easy. Not Chicago, Ohio. Thank you, Amy. I currently live in Ohio. Yeah, I used to live in New York, well, in New Jersey. I went to college in Jersey, but I came here for my grad school, and now I met the love of my life here, and now I'm living in Ohio. But with that being said, let's get started on this presentation. Thank you so much. Um, Thank you so much for joining. But yes, no, I also, for Maria, we want students to be in this presentation too, because you'll get a lot of great information out of this. But welcome to Winning the College Game, where admissions strategy meets financial strategies. I'm going to, if you have any questions, just hold them until the end of this presentation, because I don't want to miss anything. So with that being said, let's get started. All right, I am here on behalf of Crystal Clear College Planning that partners with scholars. So I just want to give you a little bit of background and what that means, right? In this partnership, it means that both Crystal Clear Planning and the Scholars Group work together to provide structures, tools, and expert guidance for everything that you need as a family for admissions and financial aid. We are going to go over a lot of information tonight. I'm going to be very honest. I'm going to be talking for about an hour to an hour and 5 to 30 minutes depending on how much information we have to cover. But just stay tuned. Every single information is going to be super, super helpful. And then you can ask questions at the end. So the families that we work with here always get access to different admission strategies and college list development and financial aid planning and also financial aid support, right? When people think about college, they don't really think about the next steps and the next step and the next step. That's where we come in to be able to help you think about all those things, right? Your families also get award reviews, appeal guidance, test prep strategies, test prep resources, scholarships. That's the big one. Outside scholarship support, LinkedIn and resume building, some of the things that people don't think about, essay development, college transition coaching, and much, much more. So in this presentation, we'll talk about the strategy, some of those strategies. We'll get into a little bit of like surface level, and then we'll also talk about how we can support you as a company. A little bit about me. My name is Ruka, and again, I'm here to talk to you about everything admissions and financial aid. But again, like I said, in terms of questions, please hold them until the end because I don't want to miss anything. A little bit about me. I know I gave you guys a little snippet in the beginning. I graduated from Stockton University with a degree in psychology. And then I got my master's in higher education and completed my PhD in organizational leadership. And fun fact, people always ask, why'd you get some, like, where did all these degrees come from? One of the things that we do at this company is that we make sure our students understand what it means to major in certain degrees. And I always wish that there was somebody there to tell me what it meant to major in psychology. So I kind of graduated with a psychology degree and still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to, make money. So it meant that I had to keep going back to school. But back then I didn't know what that meant. So one of the things we talk to your students about is like, is finance going to be an important thing for you as a student? And how do we pick a degree that you're passionate about, but can also get you to your values? And then some fun fact about me, I enjoy running marathons and competitive eating. I know that's a fun, weird fun fact. I've ran 2 full marathons and I haven't competed in a while, but I used to be a competitive eater and I was really good. And if you get a chance to work with me down the line, I could give you some more fun facts that, um, I have to think, I like to think I'm a fun fact trick. All right, so let's get started. College is expensive. So I want you all to put in the chat for me. Tell me how much you think it's going to cost for 1 year at a public university. And when I talk about cost, I'm talking about everything, right? Tuition, room and board, books, miscellaneous expenses. How much do you think it costs for universities? All right, we've got 32,000, 25K, 60K, 30K, resident, 27K, that's great, 20K, 30K, okay. These are good averages. Okay, all right, let's see. The average public cost is 27,300, so about 27,000. And I love that somebody said resident because it's important to know here in state versus out of state, right? So if you don't live in California and you want to look at California schools, the UC schools are about $70,000 a year. Versus if you live in Washington State and the cost of University of Washington is about 35,000 in state. Now, how much do you think it costs for an average run-of-the-mill private school, all inclusive? Somebody said 160K per year. Actually, you could be right. All right, we've got Couple 75, 50, 80K, 65. Okay, these are good. Great, right? So the average right now is about 50, 60,000, $56,000 a year. But this is what I like to call sticker price. And when I mean sticker price, it means nobody likes to pay the sticker price for anything. Like that's the first price you see. So this is where we start to look at where can we bring this cost down? Like that's what this presentation is going to really focus on. And then of course, what do you think the elite institution costs, right? How much do we think the elite private? So we're thinking the Harvards and the Browns, 100K. 90, okay, 70K, 120K. Yeah, these are some great guesses. 70K. Perfect. Yep. So that 90 to 100K, right? Kind of ridiculous that it's approaching the 100K year mark and it's just going to kind of keep going up. But that, again, that's why we're having this conversation to make sure that you understand what opportunities exist for bringing those costs down, right? One of the most important disclaimers that I like to give is that a lot about what we're talking about tonight does not have to do with those elite private institutions. Doesn't mean we can't support you, but they play by their own set of rules. I just want you to be aware that a lot of the strategies we use depend on the kind of schools that your students are going to be planning to apply to. But as we say, the college price just keeps going up and up and up. All right. So one thing that we always talk about is goals when it comes to an institution. We say, what are the goals of a school and are they more focused on research versus education? Right? What do I mean by that? Well, for example, since a lot of you are from Washington, the University of Washington is a great college. However, they spend most of their money to focus on what we call graduate level programs, right? So how you see that kind of play out in undergrad for most of your students is that you might show up to an English 101 class and there's about 500 students in your class. Your professor doesn't know your name and you're just a number. And the professor is probably going to stand in front of the class on the first day and say something like, you're all qualified, you got here, but we grade on a curve. So 1/3 of you are not going to make it through my class. That's what we call weeding out versus helping a student to succeed. But on the flip side, if you're looking at those small to mid-sized public schools or private schools, their number one role for their professor is actually to teach their students and to provide research opportunities for them and not do research, right? But instead they will use the research as an educational tool. What does that mean? You'll go into smaller class sizes. Your professor is probably the one teaching you versus a TA, and they're going to hold you accountable so that you get what you need to get done. It's not really a matter of right or wrong. It's just we want you to understand the different types of schools and how that is going to be a good fit for you and your students. So for any students being here, right? And the big secret in this whole process that we'll talk about is graduation rate, right? Families spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an education, but that does not necessarily mean that we will come out with that piece of paper on time. And when we think about on time, we're thinking about 4 years. That's what most people always think about when you think about on time, what's the graduation rate, and is that 4 years? Okay, so graduation rate, what does that mean? Here is an example, right? We have Eastern Washington University, right? 50% of their students will graduate in 6 years, right? That's great. So keep that number in mind, right? On the underside, Whitworth University has a 64% that graduates in 4 years. That's higher. Now, I just like the goal is as parents, I just want to know how much is this going to cost me, right? Eastern Washington costs about $28,000 a year. Now, if we spend 6 years there, we spend a total of $168,000. Now, mind you, only 26% of students get out in 4 years. That's the number for Eastern Washington, and that's what the data shows. And then at Whitworth, the average cost is about $37,000 a year. And again, that is not their sticker price, but we'll talk more about what that kind of means. So 37,000 times that 4 years means that we spend about $148,000, and we are getting out in 4 years with graduation because the graduation rate for 4 years is about 64%. So there's a couple of things I want you to kind of recognize here, right? One, just because something looks cheaper does not always mean it's actually the cheapest school on the list, right? You'll see that Eastern Washington, for parents, you'll probably be like, $28,000, that sounds great, right? But when we look at the data a little bit deeper, we start to understand, like by the time you factor, like how long am I going to spend there? Is it 4 versus 6 or even more? The overall cost might look higher at first glance, but it's important to see the full picture. And sometimes families will ask, well, makes a university graduate students in 4 versus 6, right? Sometimes it's not the student's fault. Like maybe you go to register for biology 101 and the class is filled up, so you have to wait till next semester. And because you waited till next semester, that pushes your graduation by another semester. There's a lot of different reasons this can happen, but the data is showing that these are the numbers we want you to pay attention to and what is important to you as a family. Okay, so our goal in this process and your goal in this process is to get a private education at a public education price. What does that mean, right? Sometimes I think that we can do a lot better, right? At the lowest price possible. So even if you're going to a public education, we still want you to do it at the lowest cost possible. I went to a public education for all three of my degrees, right? I'm not against them, but I just want us as people to understand where you have opportunities to get money and discounts and where you don't. Just gonna make sure my screen is still sharing. Wait. All right. So looking at the total picture and how do we do all of this? Let me see. The first big thing that, and that's one of the going to be the biggest things we talk about tonight, is student positioning, right? Student positioning is taking all the fun things about your student, matching that with what they're looking for in a school, and then saying, okay, I'd also like to get some money in the process. So you'll hear that word student positioning a lot through this entire process, right? So of course, when we talk about student positioning, we always have to talk about standardized tests. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about SAT and ACT and what that means and why it's important. The good news is the colleges don't care which one you take. So you'll notice that for a lot of students and a lot of families, they always think that it's SAT, but it's just because SAT is more popular, but it's not necessarily, it really does not matter, right? So one of the things that we do is that we have students do what we call a diagnostic test to figure out SAT versus ACT because yes, you might have been having students might have been taking SATs all their life, but surprisingly, they could be stronger in ACT. So they'll take one full practice test of each exams, and then we'll have them compare their score to see which one they're best at. The point is that we want them to pick the best test and then study towards it. Because again, universities do not care which one they take. We always recommend that students get started with this at the beginning of their junior year. So if you're not at the beginning, you're a little behind, but it doesn't mean we can't catch up. Because for the most part, we want you to take about this exam at least 2 to 3 times, right? So, what is the difference between the SAT and ACT? The ACT is more knowledge-based and straightforward, meaning it's more aligned with the things that you learn in the classroom, right? So the typical English and the math class and the LA and literature. But the SAT is more logic-based and it's more reasoning-based and it's more about figuring out how are they asking the questions in order to answer it. I promise you, there is no right or wrong here. Like I work with families and I work with parents who think that they have to take the SAT, but colleges don't care which one because it really just comes down to which one your students are the strongest in. I was one of those people that was lucky enough to take one SAT and one ACT, and I was definitely a lot stronger in the ACT than the SAT, and I was really glad I got the opportunity to do that because it allowed me to get more scholarships because there's even numbers for both of them, right? We often see that what you'll notice is that we often see that a lot of students always score better in one than the other. One of the other things that you'll know is that the ACT is a faster paced exam. So whether you take it online or you take it on paper, it does have impact on some students. And that's why one of the first things you'll do when you sign up with us, if you decide to sign up for this package, is that diagnostic test, right? Some differences is that the ACT is scored on a 36 and the SAT is scored on a 1600, right? So when we think about the sweet spot, right, for the ACT, you want to be getting that 28 to 32, and then the SAT that translates to about 1300 to 1450. Again, those numbers sound different, but they're on equal lines. But really, all of it is relative because it depends on the school that's on your list, right? Stanford University, for anyone who's listening, right? If Stanford is on your list, they probably want a 1600 out of 1600, but other schools are going to have lower expectations. So once we help you to start to build your college list, that list will give us direction, right? It tells us what am I studying towards as a student. If we pick schools that you're really passionate about and it falls into your parents' financial situation, and those schools are test optional and we can get scholarships, great, right? But if they want a 1400, then we'll say this is what we have to practice towards to get that 1400. One of the things about AC, like the writing section, is Writing doesn't even exist on the SAT anymore. I don't know if any parents know that, right? But there is an ACT writing section, right? And another question that comes up a lot is the science section. We encourage students to still take it in the ACT sections because some colleges are starting to require it. So it's just a lot better to have it in the event that you need it. Now, the next question is, what is super score, right? What about super score? So, for example, and this is why we always push for you to take the exam multiple times. If you take an exam in March and then you take the exam in April, if you do better in reading for March and you do better for math in April, some schools, and not even some, majority of schools will take the highest of both sections, combine it, and give you a super score. Now, let's say your March was a 1200 and you did a lot better in English, and your April was a 1200 and you did a lot better in math. And then we combine your March and April English and math, and that bumps you up to a 1350. Universities will take that 1350, and that can be used to a scholarship and super score. Now, I will be honest and say not all schools super score. So that's one of the things we'll look at as we help you build your list. And some schools will say we'll super score the SAT, but not the ACT. So it's really per school basis, but we do that research for you to be able to understand it. Another question, what about test optional? Test optional is another big question in a lot of the Pacific Northwest schools. Yes, testing can be optional for the sake of admissions, right? To get into the school, you might not need a test, but we're going to talk more about whether it's really optional for the sake of scholarships. Um, and then the last question is studying for this really important? So when people ask, is studying for this test is important? The answer will always be yes, right? It's important to study. I know some students will say, I'm a great test taker. I'll just take the test and I'll be fine. But the answer is ultimately yes, right? Do we care how you study? So students on here, not really. As long as you're motivated to study, right? You could be a student that is motivated to study through a book. You could be online program. You could be a student that likes the online program that also has an option to have a tutor at the end. The goal really is it comes down to the time in that you're motivated to spend, right? The more time you spend studying, the more opportunity you have to increase your score, which impacts both admissions and the scholarship consideration. All right. Now, this article that you're seeing on your screen right now has been around for quite some time, but it's really helpful to kind of illustrate. Remember, at the beginning, for anyone that was here, I was saying college is a business. What does that mean, right? One of the universities, Claremont McKenna, was actually caught faking an SAT score, right? So the question here is like, why would a college ever fake an SAT score? What do you get from that, right? When colleges report SAT scores, like the average SAT scores that their incoming class bring, right? They report inflated scores to places like the US News and World Records or higher rankings, because the higher your rankings, the happier alumni are, and the happy alumni are, the more money they donate, right? And it's really a vicious cycle. And since COVID, the score inflation has actually been more dramatic, right? Sometimes you'll go online and you'll see that a university will say the average is 1390, and you're like, wait, what's going on, right? But that's why our goal is to look deeper. We want to look at the percentage of students actually submitting the scores, right? We might say, oh, I really love this school, but I got a 1280 on my SAT, but like it's telling me that most students that submit their score gets a 1300. And then we look at the data and we find that only 2% of students submit their scores. You're still in a really good spot, right? We want to look really deeper into the data and see, is testing required? Is the score actually going to benefit me? If the score helps me, do we use it? Yes. If it's going to hurt me, do we use it? No. Sometimes, depending on the students we'll work with, we'll say, you can submit your test score to this school, but don't submit it to this school, right? So there's always going to be a better route, right? It's all about understanding that understanding the business sides. Colleges want certain numbers because certain numbers make them look great. All right. Now, but the good news is we always like to say that our kids they're more than test scores. I like to think that I loved school. I was great at school, but the SAT and the ACT was not my strongest suit. My first SAT, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember. I took a nap, like a quick 15-minute nap because I was just so overwhelmed. I was like, what's going on, right? Um, and that's why I'm always like, universities will always want to see more, right? And when we talk about more, we have GPA, we have rigor of studies, right? One of the primary pieces that universities are looking for is what kind of classes are you taking? Like what rigor of classes are you taking? I was one of those students that didn't do the best on the SAT and ACT, but I was taking those AP classes, the IBs, the Running Start, the college courses, right? And then they'll also want to say, how well are you doing in those classes? And what is your overall strength of your GPA? And this is a core foundation piece when it comes to the admissions process, right? And we want to make sure that students are balancing the rigor with everything else that they're doing. So other things includes extracurricular activities, right? This is where colleges want to see whether students are exploring their interest. Are they diving deep into certain activities that they're actually passionate about? And are they taking leadership responsibilities within those activities? And one thing I really want to point out here is because I've worked with a lot of students who will say, I really don't do anything. And then I'll talk to them and say, okay, walk me through your schedule. It's really important to realize that extracurricular activities are not just a traditional, right, clubs and sports, right? It means how are you spending your time after school? So, if you go home and you play chess with your grandma, that is an extracurricular activity. You can put that on your college application, right? Students don't realize like how much they're actually doing can be used in the process. Because in the end, the universities just want to see a big picture, right? Do you have a job? Are you babysitting? Those are extracurricular activities because it's time spent outside of the classroom. Another factors that colleges look at is diversity. And this is where we really want you to kind of think outside of the box. It's not just ethnic diversity, although schools do look at that at a certain degree. Schools are building classes and every university has institutional goals, right? For example, I promise you there's a school out there whose goal is of becoming a Hispanic servant institution, which means they're actively trying to recruit and enroll Hispanic students and they will give more money to those students. But there's also geographic diversity. There are many schools across the country that are trying to say, we have a student from every single corner of the country. We have a student from Puerto Rico. We have a student from Hawaii. We have a student from Alabama, right? And so what that means is that if that is the school's priority, if you are that student from Washington or if you're that student from Ohio, they are going to realize that you're a priority. And then we're going to say, okay, how do we check those boxes to align with the school's priority? How do I student position myself to make sure that I am wanted by that school? And then another thing we talk about here is called student interest. A lot of people don't know about this, right? This is what we call demonstrated interest. There's a lot of ways for students to demonstrate interest, right? When you visit campus, when you talk to attend admissions rep, when you attend information sessions. What colleges want to see is engagement, right? If you're not engaging with them, they're going to assume you're not interested because this is, and when you think about small to mid-sized schools, they're actively tracking engagement and they're trying to predict what are the odds this student is going to enroll in my school? If a student has engaged in a school very meaningfully, the colleges are going to say this student is more likely to attend than a student who has not engaged. And I want you to kind of think about it. If a college gives out 2,000 admissions and nobody comes, they've lost. Their goal out of those 2,000 admissions is to make sure out of those students, there are people who are interested in them and will more likely want to come to that college. And then last but not least, we have essays, right? One of the questions I hear all the time is, are the essays really important? Yes. And then I always like to say, who should write them? The student, not AI, not the parent. It's the students, right? The most important thing that matters is the primary essay, and we always talk to our students on what that looks like. Um, and then the short answer prompt. Those essays really have to do a great job of reflecting your student's authentic voice, and it's going to be very important to kind of make sure that they're the ones writing it because again, I used to be an admissions counselor. We can tell when a student writes it or an AI person writes it or their parents write it. You'll be surprised, but there's tools for those kind of things. All right. Now we are going to talk about the different attributes of schools, but we're going to frame them from the perspective of, again, going back to my famous line, college as a business, right? So right now, I don't want us to talk about location and size and all the other stuff, right? I want to show you first, like, this is how students we've worked with or I've worked with typically pick their colleges. So sometimes it's because my boyfriend or girlfriend is going to that school and all my friends are going. So I'm going to pick this school. It's just easier. I want to be there, right? For some students, it's because education is school, like I think education is school, right? It's a party school. Don't tell my dad. I know that they have a great part. It's a party school. That's one of the reasons why I want to go to that school. They have a good sports team. I really want to watch the D1 team. I want to paint my face orange and brown. And I say orange and brown because that's the color of my alma mater. And like those are the reason why they pick these schools, right? And all those things they have merit. Like especially one of the things we talk about is students who want to play a sport, right? My disclaimer is if you're going to pick a school because you want to play a sport, be careful that you also like that school because if you do get hurt, are you still going to be excited to be at that school? Some of those things that families don't think about, but we want to make sure that you're thinking about. And then for parents, it's usually easier. They pick schools because money, see, money, money, and money is usually at the top of the mind. And then, quality of education is also important. And then sometimes it's because I went there. Like pride is real. Like I want my children to go to my alma mater. Um, This one's mostly moms. I would say based on examples, like any school within 2 hour drive. And then the really cool one is the window sticker because Princeton, Yale, Brown, Harvard really looks good on the back of your Teslas. So I always say these are most of the reasons that parents will pick the universities, right? And then I always like to say this is like my corny answer that like sometimes it's just fun for when students say it, right? I would like to attend blank university. It's a great opportunity for me to study biology or history. In fact, the university is well known for its outstanding faculty and is credited for being one of the best places to study biology or history. And by the way, they offer the best financial package in comparison to their short list of competitors. So there's really two things I want you to see here that's kind of going on here, right? I'm not saying that your student needs to know that they want to be a mechanical engineer, but if they have no idea what they're interested in, it becomes a lot harder to pick the school and a lot harder to give them option. And then secondly, when it comes to financial aid, schools are in competition. There's always going to be a short list of similar schools that similar students are applying to, but the goal is we can use that competition to our advantage. Okay, so going back here to attributes of schools and what everything I just said means, right? The first one we'll talk about is, sorry, enrollment yield, right? Enrollment yield, and I kind of talked about this earlier, is how many acceptance letter a school has to send out in order to get students to actually show up on the first day of school. Again, remember, college is a business. So let's say Hiram College in Ohio, right? They know that they have to send out 8,000 acceptance letter in order to make sure that 2,000 students enroll. That means that their enrollment yield like is about 25%. That's not very strong. So Hiram will say, what do I need to do to convince these students to come? Money, right? Hiram is about $47,852, right? Congratulations, here's the honors college scholarship. Now your cost is about 32,000, right? Nothing magical has happened, right? They had a sticker price, but they needed you as a student. They wanted you, so they discounted that price. Now, if we think about a school like University of Washington, do they have an enrollment yield problem, right? I don't, do you think that University of Washington is trying to figure out like how many should we send out in order to get this number? No. Do they struggle to enroll students? No. So do they need the discount to convince students to come? I assume the answer is no. So, and then that brings us back to enrollment management, right? Enrollment management is what kind of sits above financial aid and admissions, right? Their job is to decide what is the best incoming class looks like and how much money it will cost to build that class. And that's in terms of recruitment and the big thing, scholarships. Okay. So logically, it makes sense to combine admissions and financial aid, but the goal really is like they can determine down to the dollar how much money it will convince your family to enroll. If a family really likes a school like the popular University of Washington, they know that for $1, they can most likely convince a student to come. But like a school in Hiram College might say, we need to give this family $30,000 a year in order to convince them to come to us. All right. So, rule of thumb. So, what's our number one goal, right? I want the college to want my kids badly enough to consider discounting the price. That's the eventual goal. Um, Rule of thumb in this process is we want to make sure that the students are in the top 10 to top 25% of the incoming freshman class when it comes to GPA or test scores. And we have systems that are able to do that. We want to maximize that opportunity. Now, if you think about it, right, if your student is making a school look a school look right and look good, right? Remember when we talked about higher numbers, alumni donation. If I'm increasing their profile for the incoming freshman class, that makes them look better in the marketplace. And when that happens, sometimes the school are more than willing to give a discount, right? Another rule of thumb is what we call like that top-down approach. Typically, the number one thing that we hear from families is there's just so much information out there. And again, right, they have no idea how to dissect it. They don't know where to start or how to help their students start the college search. So what we like to say is we bring the wisdom to the process. Like we use it as like a three-pronged system, right? If a school is a good academic fit, if it's a good social fit, and then it's a good financial fit, I will assume that everybody in the family is going to be happy, right? So the process that we like to use when we're working with families is using that to hone onto the list of schools, right? We tell families that the goal is to apply to 6 to 10 schools. We can do a lot more, but it costs about 40 to 70,000, no, 70, $40 to $70 to apply to schools. So I would assume 6 to 10 is a good average. But again, some families do more, right? We want to make sure that you're a strong academic candidate for that school, which means that you're strongly positioned not just to get admitted, but also to get a scholarship, right? The goal is we are wanted, we are needed, we are desired. And when we're at those schools, they're the ones that are more likely going to pay us. I always use like Brown University as one of the biggest examples. They basically give nothing a year, right? Because they know that they can afford to not give out. But there's other universities, other great universities out there that your students will fall in love with and are also going to fall in love with them. Right. Now, I don't want to say like I'm absolutely not saying that we shouldn't look at those like reach or super reach schools, but we like to manage expectations, right? We don't want your entire list of schools to be made up of just reach and super reach. Because in the end, I will be honest, it ends up in tears, right? Usually what we'll do to encourage our students and family is to pick their favorites, right? Some of those top schools, put your best effort into those applications, but at the same time, we're looking into our software to determine whether those schools are a good financial fit based on everything else, right? It might be a great academic fit and you love it, but how much are we actually going to be expected to pay at these schools? Because again, some of those schools, as we saw earlier, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Now, we want to make sure, again, we're looking at the big picture. Another thing is being willing to travel away from home can also dramatically cut the cost. I know some people like to think about out of state versus in state. Um, but the answer is, yeah, if you want to go to a UC school and you're in Boston, that is not going to cut your costs because those school, again, they don't have an enrollment management problem because we've already kind of explained, right? They don't have an issue getting people. They do not need to discount their prices. So when we think about, okay, I want to travel away from home, we have to look at what we call those diamond in the rough schools, right? Those schools that everybody overlooks, but they're fabulous liberal arts schools. And your students will do research of them and say, okay, this is actually kind of a great school. I loved I've worked with so many students who will say, I can't believe how much I love this school. Like incredible quality education, a good social fit, and they're giving me this much money. This is great, right? These are the schools that are like they're basically begging you to come. The same way you will have a list of schools that you are begging to go to, there's going to be we want to build a list of schools that are begging you to come so you always have options, right? Again, they might be regional public universities, smaller private liberal arts, right? Large state institutions, right? Universities. But ultimately, those large state institutions and elite private school, once again, they do not have to work to get their students. So they don't often cut those sticker prices we talk about. And then when I talked again, one of the things we look at is retention rate, right? Retention is how many students are coming back their sophomore year. So when your student goes back their first year, they're going to come back the second year, right? Graduation rate is telling us, right, how early can the student get in and get out, right? But retention rate is do students like this school and do they come back often? Because if only let's say 20% of students go back their second year, we have to pause and say what's going on. But if it's like 80 to 90%, then we can say, okay, students love these schools, right? So we want to make sure we're asking those tough questions. 4-year graduation, retention rate, all of these things are very, very important. They matter in context, right? So digging deeper, that's our role in this entire rule of thumb. Okay, Now we're going to transition into the financial, the fun part of this conversation. Every time I look at this comic, I chuckle a little. So it's been kind of available for a while, right? In the comic, you've got mom and dad saying, "Move back home. Kids today are so lazy and irresponsible. Like we started out with nothing." And then you've got the kid saying, "Well, I would have loved starting out with nothing. I like to think I was that kid, but we figured it out." But the moral of the story here is we don't want our kids to be a bad student loan statistics. Like every month having to pay back a huge sum out of their salary. But student loans don't necessarily always have to be bad, right? We can use it as an incentive. Like that's what we like to call the carrot here, right? If you complete your 4-year degree in 4 years, you do well academically, you borrow for the 4 year that you're in school, and you build a plan on how to save and pay for college, you can help them successfully graduate. So let's talk about kind of college cost, right? Here is a good example of, I would say, schools across the country, and you're going to see a couple of in-state, and you'll see some of those out of state pricing. University of Alabama, in-state is about 34,000, out of state is about 57,000. UCLA, in-state 38, out of state 72. Florida, you'll notice in-state is about 24, which is pretty affordable, but out-of-state is about 45. University of Virginia, which is one of the more expensive state schools for out-of-state students, at about 84,000, right? And then University of Washington is about 35 in-state and 69 out-of-state. University of Arizona is about 35,000 in-state and then 61,000. So then we'll go to some of those private schools. You'll see Harvard's about 90, UPenn, Boston, Pepperdine, which is technically not an elite institution, but they're getting up there, is about $98,000. Now, part of this conversation again is recognizing that this is the sticker prices. Some of these prices you'll never be able to change, like California prices, California pricing. If you want to go, you're gonna have to pay. But other schools do offer money, right? University of Washington's actually gives out-of-state students like a small scholarship. University of Arizona will give larger scholarship based on GPA, right? University of Alabama actually loves that their system, right? The higher your GPA and test score, the more money you get. They have a great system where it's just go on the website, this is it, this is what you'll get, right? For University of Alabama, think about it. What is important to them? Test scores and GPA. Basically, not buying, but they're buying students for strong test scores to increase their profile because that's important to them. Harvard University is a need-based, right? If you don't have financial need, there's no money coming your way. UPenn and Boston, similar. Pepperdine, I'll say, is trending towards more need-based and also does not give a lot of merit. So when you look at these schools, those sticker prices are not exciting. And that's why I think it's important that we understand the financial picture and where we actually have opportunity to get money. Again, I'll say this, it doesn't stop you from applying to those schools, but it's very important to have those backup because the most important statistics on this slide that I want you to see is that only 25% of public college students actually graduate in 4 years, right? The national average is 6.2. So 4 years for a 4-year degree. So that's why we keep bringing up like graduation rate. So financial positioning, right? The good news is aid, like financial aid is available everywhere. The bad news is that people lose out on it in a couple of primary ways. And one of the biggest one, you'll be surprised, is everyone thinks that it's very easy. Well, maybe not everyone thinks, but it is not as easy to fill out the financial aid forms correctly, right? When people say, "Hey, I'm going to put in my retirement. I'm going to list it as an investment on the financial aid," and you wouldn't know you didn't need to do that unless you read in the tiny fine print. And now you've listed your retirement, and now it looks like you have a lot of money, and now you've lost out on money because you didn't fill it out correctly, right? Understanding that there are rules and strategies in this process. We have a team that understands the rules and the strategies. These rules and strategies, they change every year, and our team keeps up with it, right? So their goal is to kind of support you on that to make sure that you're filling it out correctly. I like to compare it to taxes, right? We're filing taxes right now. I don't file my taxes myself. In the past, I used to use TurboTax. And then finally, I got an accountant. And the difference for anyone who's sitting here, you probably know this. The difference is outstanding, right? Their accountant, their job is to say, here are the rules that have been given by the federal government, and here's the strategies that I'm going to use to reduce down your taxes, right? Our team at Scholars and Crystal Clear Planning work with families to understand those rules and how to reduce college liability within those rules, right? And then another thing that families do is you look for money in the wrong places. So one of the things we'll talk about is those small money versus big money. And one of those big things is procrastinating until senior year. I'll be very honest. Admissions, financial aid, decisions are all hit at once. So there's really fewer chances for you to make decisions as a senior, right? There's those deadlines. There are universities out there that will say, as long as you apply by October 15th and you have this GPA, you automatically get $10,000. If you're starting this process into your senior year, you miss that October 15th deadline, you're losing out on big money. All right, so let's talk about what financial aid is actually based on, right? So financial aid is based on three main things. The first one is need, which is how much money I make and the assets that I have. The second is merit, which is all the shiny and impressive things about my kid and my student, the GPA, the SAT score. And then the third piece, again, is enrollment management. So let's think about this through an example. So let's say we have two families, right? One family has $100,000 in the bank and the other family has zero, but everything else is equal. Everything else across the board, like assets, housing, finance, everything else is equal. If colleges care about their endowment, who is more likely going to get the money to attend? The family with $100,000 in the bank or the family with zero? And this isn't really a trick question because a lot of people think it is, but the reality is if you look dirt poor on paper when it comes to income and assets, then in the world of enrollment management, you don't have $100,000 ability to pay compared to the family that does. So when colleges are making those decisions, they're actually thinking about it from a business perspective because what? College is a business, right? You put your business hat on and you think, I have an endowment to spend. How am I going to spend it? And what are my priorities as an institution? This is typically where you start to see how the pieces kind of come together because it's not black and white and it's not gray, right? Because you have $100,000 in the bank does not mean you have $100,000 to automatically spend on college. All right. So the next big question that's out there is where does the money actually come from, right? The good news again is there's a lot of money available. In total, there's about $196 billion in financial aid. Now, a large portion of that, as you see, is federal loans. And again, while loans is always going to be part of that conversation, the first thing we want to focus on is free money, right? That brings us to the large bucket, right? Which is institutional grant money. So right here, right? This is the biggest bucket of money available. It's also the bucket of money that families miss the most. And the reason family miss it is going back to that rule of thumb that we talked about earlier. To really maximize your opportunity to get money from this bucket, your student needs to position themselves in the top 10 to top 25% of the incoming class at the institution. We actually have a system that can do that for us, where we can say, actually, your top 40% at the school based on the data, or your bottom 10%. I know you like this school, but this is where you're ranked. Um, so when a student is highly desirable at the school, um, that is when the schools are more willing to use this money to convince them to enroll. So I'm going to take a quick pause here. Just a quick question. I want you to put in the chat, right? Looking at this chat chart, I want you to tell me what is the one thing that is so small and so insignificant that it didn't even make it onto the chat but everybody talks about in terms of where money comes from. What is that one place that money comes from in terms of aid? I'll give you a hint. It starts with an S. Nobody? Right? We have private and employer grants. We have Pell grants, right? We've got federal work study. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Sharon. Scholarships, right? Whenever you hear me talk about money, I want you to understand that I'm almost talking about the money coming straight directly from the colleges, right? Talking about institutional grant money. I'm talking about scholarships. But a lot of people always, you'll be surprised. People forget that we can maximize the amount of scholarship that you can get, right? Everybody likes to talk about outside scholarships, and I'm not going to say you shouldn't do them. What we're saying is that you need to understand when they're beneficial and when they are not. Okay, so here's a good example, right? So there is, sorry, give me 2 seconds. Oop. All right, lost my positioning. All right, so going back to those outside scholarships and when they're best beneficial, right? So COA means cost of attendance, and then SAI is student aid index, right? When you subtract one from the other, what you're left with is what we call financial need. So cost of attendance is about 38,000. Your SAI is 24,000. Your need is $14,000. Now, let's say the school um say, okay, the need is 14,000, and then you go out and you get a scholarship for $2,000. Most families will say, that's great. I now have $2,000 less than I need to pay, but not necessarily. What the colleges can do is modify your needs. So instead of needing $14,000, they reduce that need to $12,000. Now, as an institution, they only need to give you 12,000 instead of $14,000. Congratulations, you just saved the college money, right? So outside scholarships are great, but do we want to be saving the college's money? What do we want to do? And when is it the best time to get those outside scholarship, right? So scholarship displacement is what we want to avoid. So if you're going to end up being a need-based family, it's very important to understand whether you're actually going to benefit from doing all that extra work to apply to outside scholarship, or whether your time is better spent focusing on the big money that comes directly from the college, the colleges, right? $2,000 is great, but we like the extra zeros from the need, right? If I can get $20,000 or $40,000 from the school, I would rather we focus there first. All right. So talking about how and when we actually apply to financial aid, right? The FAFSA, which is the Federal Application for Student Aid, it's about 2 years, right? So if your student is graduating in 2027, the FAFSA that we're going to look at is 2025 taxes, right? And then when we think about CSS profile is another financial aid form from schools. Like they actually want to dive deeper into your financial pictures. So mostly private institutions use this, right? In addition to that, some colleges have their own institutional financial aid form that they'll use to determine if you have need base. Again, it depends on the school. We have a system to track, right? Is this school doing FAFSA? Is this school doing CSS? And is this school doing college-owned institutional based? And then there's also college-specific scholarship application. I know we love examples, so a really good example is Washington State University. Once a student submits their application for admissions, then they actually get access to separate scholarship application, right? I will tell you this, it's unreal the amount of time a student actually misses this. We will work with a student that will submit the application, and the only instruction is please check your email because you have submitted early action. The universities are going to start to reach out to you, and then they're like, "Ugh, I got a lot of email, I'm not going to open it." And in one of those email, Washington State University has said, because of a 3.0 GPA, you've qualified to apply for this $10,000 scholarship that's due December 15th. And they absolutely miss it. So one of the things that we really push is please pay attention to your email, because after you apply for admissions, that's when many schools will then open up a portal where you can apply for a scholarship directly at the institution, right? Because again, the end goal is to reduce the cost directly. Um, Another type of form is, let's say your parents are divorced or a family gets selected for verification, there will be additional financial aid form that come into play. But again, our rule of thumb is always fill out financial aid forms, right? One of the biggest things that you want to do is I've worked with families that will say, yeah, we won't qualify for need, so we're not going to fill out the financial aid form. Nope. Nope. Absolutely do it. Financial aid is just an umbrella term, right? If you're willing to pay full for a university, like if a university costs $40,000 and you're like, oh, we won't qualify for any need or merit, but we're also willing to pay the full $40,000 out of pocket, you should still fill out the financial aid form to prove that you can pay full. Because at some of those need-aware schools, that can actually help your chances of admissions. Because now the school is saying, student's great on paper, they're willing to pay full, we're going to admit them, right? That's how all these things happen. And then on the other side, like life happens, like parents lose their job, people get sick, unexpected things happen. If you don't fill out the financial aid the first year, many schools will not allow you to fill it out later to qualify for aid. So we just want to put that down as an insurance policy, right? Even if you think you make too much money, even if you have a high 10-figure income, it's always important to have protection. So that's why I always say it's important to fill out those forms, right? Another reason we always say fill out the form is some schools will actually tie their merit scholarship to the completion of the financial aid, right? They won't let you qualify for merit aid unless you fill out the form, and others will simply give you scholarship for filling out the form. So lots of different reasons. You never know where the money's going to come from. So one of the things we always encourage is to always apply for aid, and we support you in doing that. Okay, now let's look at an example that compares private versus public schools because this is where things can get a little bit misleading, right? What this example is showing is that if a family qualifies for a need-based aid, we want to make sure that we're choosing schools that's actually going to, fulfill that aid, right? So in this example, we have a school that costs $30,000 a year, right? The student aid index says it's $10,000, which means the family has a financial need of $20,000. And then the school says, we are going to meet 100% of this need. 80% of that support is going to come in the form of a free money, so scholarship, right? And then 20% is going to come in form of a loan. So when we add all of that together, the total out-of-pocket cost for what started as a $30,000 school becomes $14,000 every single year. Great. Now we look at the second example, right? The school cost at a glance, it costs $18,000, right? And it looks cheaper because if a school costs $18,000, that's great, right? The SAI is $10,000, so the student aid need is about $8,000. But the school is only meeting 50% of that need. So this is what we call gapping, right? The school has shorted the family on what was needed in order to attend. So out of what they did give, only $2,000 was free money, and the other $2,000 is in the form of a loan. So when you add that back up, the total cost of attending that $18,000 school is actually $16,000 a year, right? And this is the key takeaway, right? Just because a school looks cheaper on paper does not mean it's actually going to be the cheapest option. I have worked with students where they fall in love with a private university that's about $70,000 a year, and there's a public university that's about 40,000, and parents are like, that 70,000 just can't do it. And then we look at need-based, we look at merit-based, and that private institution covers about 50,000, and now it's only $20,000 left, right? We always want to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so now when we start to talk more about strategy when it comes to FAFSA, this is an example of how we reduce the family student aid index. One thing I've learned is families didn't know that you could actually reduce your SAI. So how do we do that, right? So we have family A, their income and asset result in a student aid index of about $19,000, right? And then family B, their SAI after everything. We look at the financial pictures. We have conversations with our people on our team to understand what could be adjusted. Through the process, they were able to reduce their student aid index to a little over $8,000. So let's think about what that difference really means, right? That's roughly a $10,000 per year. So over 4 years, that's $40,000, which means a family could end up spending $40,000 more for college that they needed to simply because they didn't understand the strategy or rules, right? I know that it's about $10,000 spread throughout the year, but that's very painful when you multiply it by four. This is why we always let families, like we always tell you, it's very important to know what your SAI index is, but it's also important to understand what that number actually means for your family because the numbers will tell us whether you're positioned for need-based, merit-based, or a combination of both types of money. So, I know, wouldn't it be, we can actually, one of the things we can do is help you calculate your SAI. And we'll talk about when, and how we can do that for you. But again, this SAI number, very important. And you'll see same income, same college savings, same other savings, same other real estate, four students, one school, different SAI. Really changes the game. All right, now let's talk about assets because not all assets are treated the same on financial aid forms. And it pains me because families don't understand this, right? There are different categories of assets. One we call accessible assets and non-accessible assets, and also exempt asset, right? One of the most important things to understand here is that the retirement assets are exempt. Please don't report them as that, right? Remember earlier when I mentioned that retirement should not be reported on the FAFSA? That's because retirement is exempt and people don't know that, right? 529 accounts are not exempt for the students that you're currently filling out the financial aid form. So Let's, for example, say if Susie is the student, she's attending college, she has $20,000 in her 529 account, that money must be reported. But if Susie has a younger sibling, Johnny, who has also $20,000 in his 529 account, that money does not need to be reported. Families don't know this. Um, 529 plans are considered parent-owned asset at all times for the benefit of a student, which means that they're reported as parent assets. But sometimes I've seen families report it as student asset, and because it's reported wrong, the school is going to think it's a student asset, right? It's important to understand that money is treated very, very differently depending on whose name it is in, right? If money is in your student's name, that is the worst possible place for it to be in. Just letting you know now. Student owned assets are assessed much more heavily, even if it's in just your savings, even their check-ins, right? Which means colleges will say, we expect you as a student to use that money to pay for school because what else are you using it to pay for, right? We also have to understand that assets like businesses, home, vacation properties are valued differently, right? Now, just because Zillow says your home is worth a certain amount does not mean that that's the number that should be automatically reported. Again, these tiny mistakes, right? The goal here is to report assets accurately. We don't want to underreport, but we absolutely, absolutely, definitely don't want to overreport. Um, and finally, it's also important to understand that there are tax implications and financial aid implications tied to all these decisions, right? And that's why planning is so important, right? The earlier families plan, the earlier they understand the rule, the better position that you are in the eyes of the colleges. So now let's put everything together. I'm almost at the end. I know this has been a while, but the surprise is coming. So if we put everything together in a timeline, the timeline here shows that your junior and senior year, but I do want to note that we work with students as early as freshman and sophomore year. And right now on my roster, I've got an eighth grader. It's never too early to start, right? We always encourage families to start their process as early as possible because it gives you more runway to make decision and position yourself in the absolutely best possible way, right? If a family has not started yet, right? If you have juniors right now, this is possibly the best time because I know sometimes it's like, oh, I'm graduating next year, but your application is due in October. So what's that? May, June, July, August, September. That's in 8 months. And then summer, you don't want to really work too much on your application. So the time is kind of dwindling, right? So this is where we start to talk about the student index, right? Some of the other things we also do, and I told you earlier, is we do a career aptitude test, right? We have our students take their typical PSAT their junior year, but they also start taking their SAT during their junior year. Junior year is also when we really start the college search. We check on the status of high school academic pathways, meaning what classes are you taking and what does your rigor look like and how can we improve that? Right? It doesn't mean, oh, we're gonna say you must take AP Calc. If you're not good at AP Calc, do not take AP Calc because rigor and grades, all of it matters depending on the picture we're trying to paint. We start to identify the people who will be writing your letter of recommendations. My juniors have already started asking for letter of recommendations. And I know you might be like, wait, isn't that early? Nope. Because would you rather be the family that's asking with 300 other seniors to the same teacher senior year, or the student who was asked 3 times leading up to senior year, giving you all the tips and tricks right now, right? We also start working on resume, right? And we also get to do the fun things like virtual tours and visiting campuses, right? This is especially important to all those students that will say, I have no idea what I like. So it's like, all right, let's get you into those tours, right? A lot of times students don't know because they've not experienced a different environment yet. So seeing a small school versus a large school versus an urban campus versus a rural campus brings a lot of clarity. I love using the personal examples because I was like, oh yeah, like I'm very outgoing, so I'm definitely going to want to go to a large city school. And then I visited, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Rutgers University, and I found out that if I took an 8:30 class, I would need to take a bus on the highway to get to class. And I said, will I be up? Well, is it possible for me to be up in time to take a bus to class? Like for my 8:30 classes, I was waking up at 8 o'clock. And I went to a campus that was a 5 minute walk to my class, right? Because I was like, I know who I am as a person. I had to kind of sit back and think about like, yes, I might like a large environment, but am I gonna make it to class on time and will I be successful? Sometimes it seems like a silly question, but it's very important to challenge our students to think that way. Um, and then when we move into senior year, right? Senior year is really when we want you to finish strong academically. Students will think that they don't have to worry anymore because they've graduated. No, colleges will ask you for your final transcript, and as sad as it is, they can resend an offer if you do not do well in your classes, right? Sometimes I have students retake SAT or ACT. You can do that and resubmit scores to get more scholarship, right? We're also ranking and stacking colleges and putting them in order of preference. We're still visiting schools, right? Between September and November, we're working on submitting your application. The goal will always be early action. Personally, I do not believe in submitting an application after Thanksgiving. After that, you shouldn't be struggling anymore. Leave that for your friends, right? So our goal is to apply early action because one of the tips is that there are schools out there where if you apply early action, there's a 60% chance you get in. If you apply regular, there's a 3% chance you get in. Am I being dramatic with the numbers? Yes, but that's actually how they are, and that's how they feel sometimes. So why would you miss out on early action when that increases your chances by almost 50%, right? So our goal will always be to apply early. Then the FAFSA typically opens in October, so we help you file that in October. CSS and profile and those institutional forms will follow after. And then this is when the students will start to hear back from schools, like award letters, like in February and March and April, right? And then you make a final decision by May 1st. You submit your housing deposit, and you're like, yay, this process was easy because I had help, right? I know this feels like such a small way to put it together in the timeline, but within this timeline, there's so many moving pieces that are happening, and our goal is to just kind of give you order in the chaos that's happening. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a quick case study just so you kind of understand, right? Some of the students I've worked with in the past and our team has also worked it in the past, right? What this case study is meant to do is to show you what happens when academic and financial strategies come together, because that's the goal, right? These are real students, these are real families, these are real outcome, and I think they might be very helpful in helping you understand the system and how it can completely change what college already cost. So, first case study is Elisa. Elisa was the oldest of two. She had SAT of 1400. That's a great score. Her parents were like, well, we don't think private school was going to be an option because we can't afford it, right? In their head, like private school is like 70 to $90,000. But their household income was about $72,000 a year. And they did have some money saved in a few different assets here and there. So when we first met and we ran the numbers together, their initial SAI came out to be $26,000. And then using CSS profile, it was $16,000 on the FAFSA. So from there, we were able to analyze their financial picture and look at what adjustment were possible within that, right? We were able to reduce their SAI from $26,000 to $20,000. That's a $6,000 difference within 4 years, right? And then academically, Elisa, she had some really strong schools on her list, right? She got Whitman, Washington State, Lewis and Clark, Gonzaga, PLU, Richmond, right? At that time when we first met, Whitman and Lewis and Clark both had a sticker price of about $45,000 a year. Whitman offered Elisa $31,000 and then Lewis and Clark offered her $26,000 and she chose to attend Whitman. And then she only ended up paying $14,000 a year out of pocket, which is roughly the cost of tuition and fees at University of Washington, right? That SAI is very important. Those scholarship, those need-based, like all those things, and those schools were all in her wheelhouse. And then the second case study is Rachel. So Rachel was biology slash pre-med. Her SAT was about 1460. Again, great score. But the challenge we faced with Rachel was that she was only interested in three schools. Like, we have some students who come in and say, I'm going to this school. So she had to go through more of the college search process to expand her list. And in the end, we ended up finding her about 10 schools that she really liked. Like she was very surprised because she was sure that she was only going to those three. Family had a very high income of $360,000 a year, around that. They also had about $300,000 kind of saved in various assets. So when we first ran the number, their initial SAI came out to be $116,000, which is quite high up there and would be like absolutely no merit, no need. But after doing some work and our team looked at everything together and we looked at the financial pictures, we were able to help them reduce it down to $95,000 a year. Um, Again, a lot of people hear that number and immediately assume that the family was not going to receive any college, right? High income, even though she has a high scholarship. And that assumption is actually kind of incorrect because she chose to go to Drexel University in Philly and she received $34,000 in aid for what was at the time a $52 $2,000 a year school. So that means she was only paying $20,000 out of pocket. She also received offers from Illinois Institute of Technology, and she could have attended that for just over $9,000 a year, but ultimately she chose Drexel. So, really two things going on here. The first question we always have to ask is, was this was this need-based or merit-based, right? If we look at Rachel's case, it was not need-based because even after reducing the SAI, it was still about 95,000. So the next question that we jump next to is, was this purely merit-based? And the answer to that is no. That again, remember, sometimes it's not need, you get no need, sometimes you get no merit, right? Enrollment management will come back into the conversation. And if you remember, right, this is understanding, right? What the school is saying, how much money do we need to give this family to come because we need these numbers, right? And then the second place is also understanding how we reduce the SAI in the first place, right? Originally, Rachel's family had about $300,000 in what the financial aid system considers like an accessible asset, which means financial aid is saying you can pull that money out and pay for college. You got it. But through strategy, that money, we were able to reposition it into non-accessible assets. And financial aid was saying, oh, actually, you can't touch that money. And that's always the goal. The goal is how do we reposition so these universities don't think, hey, this money is available, spend it, right? So if you think about it from the college perspective and you think about enrollment management, right? If we compare the two students, right? They both had the same academic profile. They both had some sort of high income family, but one family appears to have $300,000 in the ability to pay, and the other had zero, right? Again, who does the college feel like they need to give money to? That's why we go back to that gray. It's not black and white because you have this money, it doesn't mean you can spend you can spend it or you want to spend it, right? Colleges care about that endowment, right? If they believe a family can subsidize the cost of their students' education, they are happy to take that money before they use their own. So the goal is to make them believe that you cannot. And the goal is we are here to help, right? What we offer is personalized onboarding. So you'll get a chance to meet with one of our counselors. That means that you and your student will actually meet with people on our team to get oriented with our online platform so you understand how everything works and where to find what you need. We also provide financial aid analysis. We help you calculate your SAI and then walk you through what that number actually means. From there, we'll provide detailed projections for both need-based and merit-based, along with all the strategies that are tailored to your family. You'll also get access to an online portal, which is a centralized portal that houses all the tools and resources we use for college research, college application, and college planning. In addition to that, your student will have multiple one-on-one coaching sessions with our dedicated college coach. So you'll be able to talk to them face to face and have unlimited access to messaging them. But those in-person sessions are usually focused on building out the college list, preparing for admissions and application, and making sure that they stay on track throughout the entire process. Um, in addition to that, we support with admissions application. We help you craft a strong and compelling admissions application. We manage all the financial aid form, help with the submissions. Once your award letter comes in, we help you compare and analyze those offers. We also assist with appeals for additional financial aid where it makes sense. We also host monthly calls that cover relevant topics. So if you are a junior right now and you decide to join us, there's 3 monthly calls that you've missed. And I'll tell you that one of them is about letter recommendation. Another is about resume, right? We would want you to catch up on those calls. We have a robust task management system that's customized specifically for you. And then the system really does a great job of keeping track of everything, right? You're able to connect it to your calendar so you know, okay, there's a reminder, this is due, this is due. And it's also very mobile friendly because we know a lot of things are on the phone lately. Okay, so when you look at the investment in this program, right? So depending on the option you choose, it can be as low as $97 a month or a total cost of about 5,000, right? When you put that in terms of context, it makes a lot of sense for families, right? Most families who work with us are saving somewhere between $40 to $60,000 on their college education, right? In addition to the financial saving, we're also dramatically reducing the amount of times you spend in this process doing all the research of things that we know the answer to. So instead of spending over 200 hours trying to navigate everything on your own, we bring that down to about 40 hours, and we handle the heavy lifting. So this means less stress, less confusion, and a much more supported process, right? Imagine all this information I've given you in the last hour and 12 minutes, and then having somebody who can help organize it into a way that makes sense for you. So we would love the opportunity to see if we can help you or your student, right? So one of the things that we're doing right now is if you've never scheduled a free consultation with us before, right, this is a good time for you to do that. So during that consultation, we'll talk about your students' goals, dreams, and honestly, what's keeping them up at night or what's keeping you up at night as parents, right? The purpose of this call is to identify your goal and then determine which program is a right fit for you, right? I also want to show you part of our system so you can actually see the software, right? If you schedule your consultation within the next 24 hours, you'll get an access to one of our free software. Look at this, right? So you'll be able to have access to this where you'll put in the universities and you can look at some of those data that we work with. This is not the full one, but again, if you schedule your consultation within the next 24 hours, we will give you access so that you can use this on your own, right? You'll see that at Carnegie Mellon, the average SAT is 1500 to 1570. And they also take ACT, right? The test policy. It's not always required, right? Some of the things you'll learn about is you'll be able to input need-based versus merit-based, right? Students with need, how much can you right? Creighton University, this family can expect $22,000 in merit aid for a $66,000 sticker price. So, right, this system, we want you to be able to analyze admissions, costs, financial aid, and you can see whether you qualify to work with our team, really, right? Some of these are like at George Washington, they have different types of scholarship, full tuition scholarship with the deadline that we want to make sure that you're not missing, right? We will help you provide very clear next steps on how you can position yourself to get the free money for college, right? So again, if you schedule that consultation with us, you'll get the free access. I'm going to put the link in the chat. So just some more stuff for you to look at. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code, but I will also put the link in the chat for you to be able to do so. Um, and then this is honestly time for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, let me go ahead and get this link so that we can get you all set up for anybody who wants to schedule their consultation between the next 24 hours so that they can get the I put it in the chat. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and please let me know if you have any questions about anything. Yes, it should be able to be rewatched. You can email us and ask for the recording and we can send it to you. Yes, we work with athletes and we also have people on the team that work with athletes. So we have multiple different people. And sometimes for our athletes, it's the university is recruiting. We just want to know which one is the best and can you help us with the admissions process and financial aid and all that stuff. So yeah, we've worked with multiple athletes and how to navigate those conversations. Um, Run and start, and I don't think it impacts this process necessarily. It's just because it's a school program. So, um, I would say it works really nicely. We have students who have run and start who are in the program, and we just kind of add it into their profile. So I wouldn't say it impacts it in a negative or positive way. It's just taking like an IB or an AP class. See, make sure I'm not missing any questions. All right, let's see. If a student graduates high school with the associate, how does that affect university admissions? Um, I don't know if it affects it in a way that we have percentages, but I will say it does strengthen their application because it shows the university that the student is already college ready, right? They're coming in with almost 2 years and they just need 2 more years. So what we would do is we want to position the student in a way that allows them to showcase that I've been taking college classes and I've been able to successfully do this, and I can be successful at this university. I don't know if there's a lot of data out there that says like students with AA degrees actually get in more than they don't, but I will say it can strengthen their application. Great question on the 4-year college. We can help with 2-year community college in terms of like submitting the application, but the only difference is you would have to come back once the 2 years is over to then reapply. So our team would just have to meet with you to figure out which of the program works best for you and how we can tailor that to your specific case. But yeah, we've definitely worked with students who've done community college. And then maybe you would have to just come back after well, a year because you always want to apply the year before to figure out, okay, what's the next step in going into a 4-year university. What is the process to help students pick a college? There is a lot that goes into the process. I like one of the first things that we do is the student career assessment. So we have the students kind of take that. So for a lot of our students who don't understand what they want to major in, that's the first step, right? If they know what they want to major in, we connect that result with what they want to major in, and then we ask them a lot of like in-depth questions. What kind of school? What kind of size? What are you looking for? What keeps you up at night? We use all of that information to then provide a list of preliminary list of maybe up to 20 schools and have them do some research. Like we teach them how to do this research, and they'll come back to us and our counselors will talk to the student, talk to the family and say, okay, based on this research, what did you like and what did you not like about this university? And from there, we'll narrow it down to the 6 to 10, and then the student will apply to the 6 to 10. And then once they've applied to the university, the next step is looking at the awards, the financial aid, the need, the merit. What is the university giving to the student, and what can you afford? And then we put all of that together to figure out the one that comes out on top. So I know that that was a quick 15-second explanation. It's a long process, but it's starting from the beginning to figuring out what you want to study, what type of school you want to go to, what is the school offering you, and where is that three, like what is the need? Is it a social fit, an academic fit, and a financial fit? Here's the link again to schedule. Yeah. So one of the things we'll talk about at the free consultation is really the breakdown of numbers, right? The low cost $97 a month one is what we call it's for families who are like, we understand the system. We just need somebody to keep us on track. So you'll be able to pick that one and you'll get all the tools you need to be able to do it your own. It's basically a DIY. And then we have a medium range, which comes with uh, some services, and then we have the plus range, which comes with everything I talked about today. So I like to think that we have almost 3 levels. So when we set up that meeting, we can kind of determine, okay, what works best for my family right now. If I have multiple children, who should start with the DIY and who should start with the plus. And then we also have something I like to call a la carte, right? If you really think that you are able to figure out the entire admissions process, but the one thing you really need help with is the essay, then you can pay for just the essay. So I would recommend scheduling a consultation meeting because in there we can talk about numbers and what works best for you and your family. And right now we don't have multiple kids discount, but always happy to have a conversation and then circling back to my supervisor. Any other questions? I know this was a lot of information, so for those of you who stayed for the entire thing, thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you all so much. I'll be here until the last person leaves the room, just in case a question pops up. Thank you. Any last minute questions? Well, in terms of helping the client save money, in that aspect, it's really two different ways. One, save money in the sense that we work with your budget, right? The question is, what is your budget? And we'll talk to you about is what does that look like? Is it need or merit based? Like, where can we make sure we're maximizing scholarship? And then in terms of saving money, we have a financial team that's going to look at your profile to be able to figure out what's the best way to position you. I would say we've been able to help almost all our clients, but the main thing about our program is to give you like the well-rounded aspect, right? Being able to make sure that your students finding out great fit and financial fit, right? If you can't qualify for need-based money, then we look at merit-based, right? But we also want to make sure what kind of grades and what kind of test scores. So it's all about having that conversation to make sure. I can't ever say that anything is 100%, but I will say we've been able to assist every client to find like the right fit for them. No worries. Or any last minute question before I end the call? All right, I'm going to end the call now unless anybody else has anything else to add. But thank you all again so much for joining. It was a pleasure and have a good rest of your day. Bye.